Welcome back to Grumpy Roadie for another episode of Shop Talk. Today we'll be doing the first part of a series that I call Coming Back from COVID. And today we'll be talking to Matt Byrne, a production manager from Toronto that I've known for several years. And he's going to tell us about his strategies and going forward and the thoughts in general on what our industry can do in this pandemic crisis. So stay tuned and let's go right to the interview. How you been, man? Haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah, man, it's been busy. I think like everybody else in this industry, the first 2 weeks of the current situation, left me on a couch feeling sorry for myself. But then, as we've briefly discussed, I got busy, trying to, change the world, as it were, and started working on a few things. So, yeah, it's been up and down. It's always feels sort of like an extended, weird version of a summer vacation right now, where you're
Yeah.
only working a little. But at the same time, to quote another event producer I know out of Montreal, you feel like you're working 90% more for 10% of the revenue. So,
Yeah, that sounds about right.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. Well, anyways, I'm glad you're able and willing to do this interview because, there's a lot to talk about these days for our industry, right? And we got a lot to
Hmm.
deal with for all of us on all levels and angles of this. So I'm
Of
trying
course.
to
Yeah.
I'm trying to get like as much of a different perspective on the whole situation from as many different people that are related to the industry to kind of get an
Hmm.
overview of the options available to all of us, so we can
Hmm.
kind of figure out where do we go from here? What do we do from where we're stuck at right now? And what does that mean for me, you, him, her, whoever, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So why don't you just tell our audience a little bit about what you do and what your strategy is in dealing with the current situation?
Yeah. As you've known me for years, I've been a production manager, producer, man of many hats in the events industry, for almost 20 years now. I think I started in this industry when I still had hair. Um, uh, and so for after working for some big brands in the event technology space, you and I know each other from my days at PRG. I was with CCR for a while. Back in the day, I was with MediaCo when that was still a thing.
Yeah,
um,
I
you
worked for
know
all three of those at some point in time or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, from there, I was a project manager, account manager, business development and sales, doing quite a lot of sort of different things. And then back in August of 2019, I decided to open Byrne Production Services, which in retrospect was the perfect time to start a new business, and essentially offering three main pillars. One, the project production and project management and technical direction, stage management and production, and then production design. And of course, then the pandemic hit and everything sort of canceled. And, we had a decent book of business that we were looking forward to that, evaporated overnight. And I think everybody is in that kind of same situation.
Yeah, I think we were
Um,
actually on the last event of the season together, that mining conference at the
yeah,
convention center. That was the last one, right?
yeah,
At least for
absolutely. And
me, it
then
was. Yeah.
Yeah, and then right after that, of course, we got the notice that there had been somebody who had tested positive at that conference,
Right.
and then everything else sort of canceled after that, and so it was certainly a harrying time. And as I mentioned at the top here, like I spent sort of 2 weeks watching everything collapse and go, oh my God, what am I going to do?
Mm.
And then, now, or at that point, I started to realize that it's not like I heard the word pivot quite a lot. Everybody was pivot this, pivot that. And I started to think that, that might not be the right way to go. Because I had a great conversation with an AV supplier where they were sort of lamenting how they didn't want they were looking into this sort of new pivot and saying, you know, essentially that, look, I'm a rental vendor. Like that's my business. That's what I like to do, is I like to rent equipment. Going into some kind of new thing means that I'm doing something completely new. Um, and the reaction that I had to that was, well, no, you're not. You're just doing exactly what you were doing before. You're just doing it in a new channel. So I always say, like, I recontextualized what I was doing. So, I'm a production manager, TD, stage manager, and designer. And so now I just do that instead of for an event in a convention center. I'm doing that for online, virtual, and hybrid events.
Yeah, right. I mean,
Um,
the only difference at the end of the day is the presence of the audience on site or at a distance, right?
Well,
Essentially.
you're exactly right, and essentially that means that you're still applying those organizational skills, that technical
Mhm.
expertise, that creativity. They're all still applicable in this sort of new environment, but you didn't have to reinvent the wheel. Is what I'm saying,
Right.
and so there's two major things that I started to develop. One was a sort of modular broadcast solution that allows speakers and presenters to do some really pro grade video and audio for their online events, partnering with a couple of engineers on that, and then uh, and then slightly related to that, but not completely unrelated, I started working with a group of other solopreneurs like myself to create a thing called the Event Specialist Coalition, which is essentially a referral and business development network where people in different disciplines and sort of experienced generalists in each one of their fields are are banding together to go after and develop new business.
That sounds really interesting. So does this collaboration happen on a more like information exchange basis, or do you kind of pool the resources if somebody has a client and says, okay, everybody jump in on this project, or how does that what's the concept there?
Yeah, I mean, generally that is the concept. It was born out of this. I'm a member of every association out there, and at the beginning of the current crisis, everybody was sort of looking out, uh, uh, looking to surmount challenges that medium to large scale businesses were having in the industry. About furloughing employees, about how to navigate that ethically, and other examples of how do you run down your rent, how do you do these things. And then there was a group of us who sort of sat on those calls and those webinars and said, well, this doesn't necessarily apply to us because we're one person shows, as it
Right.
were, who are, handling a good portion of business, or for a lot of us, those members were our client base. Like we would subcontract with them. And we started to realize that we needed to get together as a group of solopreneurs and sort of discuss our unique challenges, which are, not any greater or lesser than those challenges, but certainly unique to our little business models. And then we started to look at things like referral networks. And it was an idea out of a colleague of mine out of San Diego who said, like in San Diego, you can go to a dentist and they're part of this little referral network. And, there's a lawyer and a mechanic in it as well. And the idea being that, if you're at the dentist and you say, oh, I need to get my car fixed, then they would go, well, I'm a member of this little trade association, and here's my mechanic who is a member.
Right.
And so there's some business development sharing aspect to it and some cross marketing, but there's also an aspect of teaming up to do things. Right? We realize that I'm a really good production manager and designer, but I'm not a creative director. I'm not a planner, and that there may be opportunities out there for us to, as you said, tag team on particular projects and sort of
Right.
assemble members. It's one of the things that we're trying to push with ESE right now is the idea that if you hire me, you are also hiring this huge bank of or bench strength of other disciplines
Right. So
that
you're
can join
basically
on to this.
hiring a team that'll find the solution you need, not just one person that can kind of cover one aspect of your needs, but like they come with a team of people that can cover all aspects of your project, basically, right?
Well, that's precisely it, right?
Yeah. I guess for a client that would have a strong appeal and make it like a one-stop shop from the client's point of view, right?
Well, exactly, and we realized that as individual members, we couldn't necessarily go out and I was thinking about the days when I was with PRG, and one of the things that I was at a great advantage of that was that if I had a show in Chicago, I could call my colleagues in Chicago and say, "Help me out with this," right?
Right.
As an independent operator, I don't necessarily have the
The
ready
infrastructure basically at
to be
your
able.
disposal, right?
Yeah, and this is giving independent business owners that infrastructure, so that if my colleague in San Diego has a project that is coming up to Toronto, that she could call me and say, "Help me execute this," right?
Right.
And so there's a little bit of business sharing on that end.
Well, I guess that's a win-win for pretty much everybody involved, right? I mean,
Hmm.
yeah, I don't see, like, I've been thinking about it, but I don't see any potential downsides to collaboration on any level ever, actually, if you think
Hmm.
about it, right? Collaboration is always something anybody can win from it, and nobody ever actually loses.
Hmm.
So I really like that idea, and I'd like to hear some more about it. So we probably should do a little feature on that project and that collaborative effort at some point, because I
Hmm.
think that's something that a lot of people could get on board with and would be very interested in hearing about. And
Hmm.
yeah, and I mean, obviously, for something like that, the more people, the more diverse expertise you can get in your pool of people, the more bases you can cover for your clients, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
So something like that will definitely grow from spreading the word.
Hmm.
And I think all of us right now are in the same boat. Essentially, we all realize none of us can get out of this on our own. The only
Hmm.
way we can get through this is if we kind of pool our resources together and work together. Because literally, our industry is the one that's going to be the last one to bounce back
Hmm.
from this. Just from a logical and a sensible point of view, if it was any different, somebody would be doing something very wrong. Let's put it that way. I think the only
Sure.
business that should be opened later than us is maybe sex orgies, but
Yeah.
I think short of that, I can't think of any business that is more susceptible to community transmission than a live event, crapping a couple of thousand people in one closed space, obviously,
Hmm.
right? So yeah, so we all got to figure out what we can do with what we know, what we've learned, what we're good at, and how that transfers into this virtual world,
Hmm.
right? I mean, we see it everywhere, not only in our industry, but even if you look at movie productions, like if you look at productions like The Mandalorian, who've been
Hmm.
employing basically a lot of technology that's straight out of our wheelhouse, you know,
Hmm.
LED walls, camera tracking, stuff like that completely crosses over into what we're doing. And
Hmm.
technologies like that. So all these new technologies are emerging that kind of go into what we do, but are new avenues of what we do. So I think all of us will have to learn to expand ourselves a little bit to new technologies, and yeah, and not cry too much about other things falling in the background.
Hmm.
I mean, you're dealing a lot with like virtual productions now. What are some of the most interesting trends and technologies you've seen emerging lately?
Well, it is a little bit of the Wild West right now. I think, there was a great article by, I think it was Event Management Blog or something else like that, where, they were saying that like all these online and hybrid technologies have actually been around for a long while, but they were sort of an afterthought. I mean, you and I have been on many events where, live streaming was sort of, oh, sure, let's add that on and we'll shoot it out to
Yeah,
Facebook
it's
or something.
always the ugly grandchild that you just throw in the mix on top of everything, and you
Yeah,
couldn't
exactly.
really build a client for it either because there was like such a little add-on point, right?
Yeah, and those companies are now seeing, exponential business development growth, and to the point where some of them sort of feel like they are drinking from a fire hose. On the flip side of that, there are new entrants. People who are who would never have thought of being a virtual event, you know, partner or producer or some kind of machination of that, who are now sort of taking a steep learning curve. And to one extent, I really applaud that effort to say, well, look, if I'm gonna, I could sit here twiddling my thumbs, or I could do something cool. And then somewhere in the middle are those of us who are creating solutions with as much technology as possible. So again, I go back to the idea of recontextualizing. Like certainly I have a couple of, like in my instance, I have a couple of products and a couple of services that I've sort of created over the last couple of months. But the essence of those things is still very much based on the same organization, production, management, and creativity that we've always done. The tools, I may have changed the tool from a hammer to a drill, but the use of the drill and the hammer is
You're
still
still mounting something with it, basically. You're still attaching something to the wall, whether it's a hammer or a screw, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's really focusing, right now, I think a lot of the industry at the provider end of the industry is really focusing and quite positively on client messages and how do we still get that message out. I mean, because that's essentially why we do events, right? We do events to sell things, to get people on board, to
communicate somebody's message to a crowd, basically.
Well, exactly. And so the toolbox may have changed a little bit, but the end result is still what needs to be achieved.
We're still fishing. We just got a new tackle box.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the client end of the industry is still in the lower end of the technology adoption curve, which I'm sure everybody's seen, like that thing where there's outliers.
Oh, just lost our connection. You just broke up there for a second. You'll have to repeat the last sentence.
Yeah, sorry. So somebody was calling me there.
That's fine. Okay.
Yeah, so on the client end of things, I think people are still on the lower end of the technology adoption curve. You could see it like 2 or 3 weeks ago. Everybody was doing everything on Zoom. They were like, let's jump onto Zoom, let's figure this out. And the results were not great. And then they moved into that phase where they did a lot of research as to what's out there, from digital hosting platforms to video solutions to the moving beyond Zoom. And the next phase of that is that what I like to call the kicking tires, right? Like everybody wants to know how much it's costing to do something professional looking and elevated. I don't think a lot of the customer base at this point in the year, which is July, tends to be a slow period for events and that kind of development anyway. People are still in that mentality, so there's not a lot of movement there. But everybody's price checking everything.
They're planning their fall season, basically, right? All their product launches for the fall and their quarterlies and shareholder meetings and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, that being said, that there's, as I said, they're in the tire kicking phase, right? And so I think in the next few weeks, what we'll see is a marked difference in that, that people will start taking that plunge. What I am reminded of is what the industry was like 10 or 15 years ago, when you had a few outliers who were producing interesting events and shows, but they were still outliers. Right. And then generally, like most corporate clients and association clients, we're still in the phase of, well, we could probably do it ourselves, or we'll go out and buy a projector and everything like that.
Well, I mean, but that's been the case for a very long time. Pretty much since technology went digital, especially in the video field, where everybody
Hmm.
thinks now they just because they can set up their little boardroom projector, they know video. You know,
Hmm.
and the problem that I, at least as a technician, I don't know if how it's as a project manager or salesperson, is that I encounter most is you're dealing with clients who have that what I call dangerous half knowledge. They
Hmm.
know just enough to make them think they know what they're talking about, but they have
Hmm.
no clue of how much more there is to know before they're actually knowledgeable. You
Yeah,
know,
that's true.
so how
It's
do you deal with that when you're dealing with the client? Kind of guiding them to explaining to them that their understanding of the technology or the possibilities is very limited. And obviously you don't want to offend the client or tell them they're uneducated or uninformed or stupid or anything like that. Obviously you can't do that. So how do you communicate that to a client? These new possibilities that they think they understand but they don't.
hmm
Like I would see
yeah.
that as a real challenge.
Yeah, I mean, it's always been a challenge, I think, in any industry, whether it's ours or cars or whatever technology. We're certainly in a different age um, than we were, say, 40 years ago. Like I'm sure you've heard this expression about like the knowledge economy, right?
Mm-hmm.
That in cars is a perfect example. It used to be that you go into a car dealership and you would trust the expert who's at the dealership because you didn't necessarily know. Then the internet happened, and now I can look at the Carfax on that car. Doesn't mean that I am an expert in the automotive construction industry. No, but I have enough knowledge to understand what a drivetrain is, right? Um, and so when I encounter clients who have dipped their toes in or have gotten the just enough knowledge to be dangerous kind of level of adoption, I'm actually a little bit refreshed because then I can start to speak the right language to them.
Right. So at least they have the vocabulary down to some extent.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
So
Okay.
if I say B and C connector, they're not looking at me like I'm speaking some strange language. Um, and so that's actually to me an opportunity to really speak that language with them and bring them into that conversation. I actually prefer those kind of clients because they like it's not explaining how a wheel works. It's understanding this is where this wheel is going to get us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that being said, I think at this point, as I said, we're still in that sort of kicking tires place in the development of these solutions. So that knows enough to be dangerous client is making a few assumptions, and I think what I've heard from other colleagues who are doing similar things is that they're getting a little shocked by the price tag of how much you should spend to produce something of the quality that they're expecting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's going to be a back and forth for a little while. Like you're just going to have clients who say, "Oh God, that was too expensive, and
Yeah.
I couldn't possibly ever
Why
afford
should I
that."
pay this much? I should have just done it on Zoom or whatever, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there'll
Yeah.
be back and forth, and that, but that will, like it was in our industry 15 years ago. Those clients who went and bought their own projector and were just knowledgeable enough to be dangerous, eventually came back into the industry and said, I bit off way more than I can chew. It's
Mm-hmm.
not giving me the results I want. What do I do?" And we as an industry need to be prepared to go patiently. Yeah, we knew you would do that, but that's fine. Come over here, and we're gonna take care of you.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's the thing, right? Our business is to ensure the client that we'll take care of them at the end of the day, right? You tell us what you need, and then relax and trust in that we'll make it happen. Is basically
Yeah,
our mission in life, so to speak, right?
exactly, exactly.
And I mean, yeah, sure. A lot of people aren't aware what goes into achieving that mission. That's why they hire us to do that for them, right? Because that's what we do, right?
Hmm.
Like I'm probably no good at figuring out, what message to put out there to launch the new, I don't know, the new VW Golf model or whatever, right?
Sure.
Or what messages I need to communicate a new trend in sportswear for Nike.
Hmm.
But once they tell me, this is a message I want to get out of there, and that is my audience,
Hmm.
then we can step in and say, okay, I know exactly how you can tell that, how do you get that message to that audience, right? Because that's what we
Yes.
do. And
No, exactly.
I think, like, yeah, we have to, like we said in Arrow, we have to change our toolbox, because we basically have to go into long distance mode for a lot of our tools, right? Whip
Hmm.
out that socket set extension piece so we can get a little further away from the screw, but we still have to get that screw into the wall. And that
Well,
screw
and
still
that's
has to
precisely
go
it.
into the wall. Somebody still has to put it in there, right?
Hmm.
It's just, and it still requires the same skills. It just needs a slightly different set of tools to accomplish that.
Exactly.
So yeah, so basically, I think we all have to adapt. Like for individuals, for technicians and freelancers, that's fairly easy because we've been doing that all along. We're always learning new gear, new technologies. Almost every job we do, we encounter a piece of technology we've never worked with before, or
Hmm.
behavior of gear that we've never encountered before that we have to deal with, right? That's that
Exactly.
that that's part of what we do. So for us to adapt and to bend with the changes, I think will be a lot easier than for a lot of the clientele,
Mm.
who are basically on the other end. They didn't have to deal with all these tools before. They just have to deal with their concepts and their ideas. And they're
Hmm.
used to have a certain avenue that they can throw their ideas and concepts into, a certain framework that they're familiar with,
Hmm.
that they're in their creative comfort zone, for lack of a better word. And now they're
Absolutely.
suddenly faced with a situation where they have new ways of communicating, new tools of expression, new interactive methods that they're not familiar with using. So they now have to change the way they create and package their messages in an unfamiliar way.
Mm.
And they're not used to constantly changing the way they do things. Right? They're probably still doing it the same way they learned in advertising school, plus their life experience since then or whatever. But the
Yeah,
principles are probably still much, you know?
I would say that a lot of clients, have been changing and adapting, but I think you're right in the aspect that business works on efficiency. Like that's been the mandate for the longest time, and certainly you could argue that may have led to some of the downfalls of how this pandemic impacted us. Um, you know, in the case of hospitals, the just-in-time supply management was very efficient as a business objective, but not necessarily great for um,
Emergency
uh, for
responses.
for emergency responses. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting aspect that a lot of our client base is in corporate organizations who have that sort of mandate of efficiency, and so they've designed these systems to be able to go, if they need to communicate to 150 people in a efficient way. They have designed systems that can go into a hotel, get food and beverage snacks, put a bunch of tables, two screens and a podium, and here's my PowerPoint, and off you go.
Yeah.
And that's a certain price point. When you try to replicate that in a virtual world, as you said, there are different tools and there's a different spend category. So, like, one of the biggest things that I've run into so far is trying to communicate to a client that, yes, that might have cost you 20K to put that on for an audience of 150 at Delta Hyatt or whatever it might be
Yeah.
for a single day. But now, if you want to do that for a single broadcast, you're spending about the same money, if not a little bit more, because there's all these technological little bits and pieces. So it's about a shift in spending. It's about a recontextualizing of that spend. But I don't think clients are 100% there yet. As going back to the whole idea of the adoption curve, we're at that lower end before it goes up into everybody adopting it. And once it does that, you'll see a lot more people turn over. But we're still on the upward swing of that. It's like any other technology. Like, think of Blackberries, right? Like, Blackberries, when they were first came out, were owned only by a certain amount of people, and you couldn't really convince anybody to spend that much money on a fancy cell phone that has a keyboard on it. I don't
Yeah.
understand. And then within a year, like, you couldn't throw a stick in any direction without hitting everybody with a BlackBerry, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um, and so, the reality is that this shift into virtual and hybrid is going to be semi-permanent, if not permanent. And so, the what we'll see is that adoption curve eventually come, right? That
Mm.
that everybody will be doing something, and it's just about the getting through that period with a client base that still thinks in the mentality of hotel breakout room, and it's easy to set up. There's a like different workflows, different spend categories, but still worth it in the end. And I think we're just waiting for that turnover to
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, obviously, it takes a while for everybody in those organizational structures, to reach a level of information that they can efficiently and effectively create new solutions based on the same technology standard available to them now that they weren't aware of beforehand, right? So
exactly.
so obviously, yeah, that's just growth pains, if you want to call it that, right?
Of course.
So what do you think that like the traditional production company, like we've named a few like PRG, CCR, Solo Tech, whoever, what can they do, or what do you think they need to do to make it, for one thing, make it easier for their clients to,
Hmm.
to adopt these new ways of doing them, and then on the other hand, for themselves to organize themselves in a way where they cater more to this type of events that so far has been only a small niche of what we've been doing, right? I mean, we've been doing like you said earlier, we've been doing webcasts and podcast events for years now, but that was like a small side hustle basically to our big shows that we've been doing, if we're honest, right? And what
Hmm.
can companies now, or should companies do to refocus, basically to bring that former side hustle into the main game? What do you think of that?
Yeah. Well, you know what? When you mention the big companies like PRG and Solotech, the challenge that I think that they're going to have is always is for 30 odd years they've been building an inventory and an asset base that was um, designed around large scale live production, right? If you need 9 million linear feet of truss, those companies can do it, right?
Yeah.
For the mid-sized guys like the CCRs or the Bespoke and all of those guys, right? They're great companies with a lot of really great people. Um, but again, all of their assets are geared towards a certain type of event, and
Right.
they're certainly doing a really good job of adapting that technology and setting up remote studios and all of those um, to adapt. But I think they're going to have a challenge in the next little while to figure out what they're doing with all this extra inventory. Like I could imagine for the PRGs of the world, they're sitting there with 9 million linear feet of truss and a bunch of auto cars that aren't going to be used for a while.
Yeah.
So the advantage of some of those companies is that they did invest a long time ago in some of this technology already, and now it's just going to be about trying to augment that in a more turnkey solution. Um, yeah, so again, I can't speak for their business models. I've worked for all of these companies at some point in my life. So, I don't envy that sort of conversation.
Mm.
Uh, I think they're going to have a very vested interest in trying to get to the reopening, as it were. But at the same time, I think they could position themselves well to, um, if they can sort of augment that hybrid solution of not having an afterthought towards the webcast, but sort of integrating that robust solution into their live solution, then they're going to make that transition much better
Right.
when we start to get into that hybrid phase. I think right now we're still like here in Ontario, we're getting into some phase two opening aspects. It was great to open our personal bubble so that we weren't just stuck in the house kind of thing. But I think as far as events go, we're still in that augmented Zoom area, right? And
Right.
the next phase will be the elevated virtual. When again the client sort of turns around and says, okay, now we understand how much it's going to cost and let's do it. And then further to that, and I think for a very long time, we're going to go into a virtual hybrid model where, yeah, I mean, you may be able to get like 100 people into an event venue here in Toronto, but you won't get 1,000 and they're not going to travel here. So you're going to have to broadcast, you're going to have to
Right.
essentially have a very robust broadcast infrastructure to be able to go out to all those other remote locations, or, you know, people at home, or people all over the world. Is one of the reasons that one of the things that we tried to tackle with Event Specialist Coalition was the understanding that when and if things reopen to a certain level, yeah, my colleague in San Diego may be doing a large scale event like they usually do, but instead of 1,000 people in the Hilton in San Diego, she's going to have, you know, 200 people there, and then she's going to have another person, like another sub event that's happening at the same time in Georgia, and then another one in Toronto, and another one in Vancouver. And
Right.
so one of the reasons that we formed ESC was to band together so that when they were doing that, we could easily integrate, like, here's Matthew who's going to do it in Toronto, and here's Jim who's going to do it in Georgia, and here's, you know, Greg who's going to, you know, whoever that might
Wherever.
be.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, you know, I remember quoting a couple of shows when I was at BRG that were just that the idea that they wanted to create like a simulcast event happening through various cities, and it was enormously expensive because there was
You had to rent
the
dedicated landlines, right, as well. Like, I don't know, some
well, actually you
ISD
needed
lines and stuff. Like
well you
six
needed
ISD line.
satellite
Yeah.
you needed satellite time, right? Like, and that's the reality. If you wanted it to be zero lag, then you
Right.
needed a satellite to do it. You know, luckily, technology has progressed, and like in our solution, we're using NDI tech, the new tech stuff, and that like is essentially a satellite feed via the internet, and so has made it very cost effective in comparison to that,
Hmm.
the old model of satellite trucks. But as I said, like you know, those are, I think, the future of events for the next little while. If you're a brand like, and I'm just gonna pop one out of my head here. If you're like a Salesforce or something, you're not gonna like doing Dreamforce is not a thing right now, and it won't be for the next few years. Because even if like somebody pulls the trigger and says, "Look, we're opening up the economy instantly, and we have treatment and/or vaccine available," even then, people are going to be like, "I'm not traveling to Houston for 2 weeks," and
Yeah,
you know,
and like what I'm always been saying, like the last ones that are gonna be swayed are the insurance company. No insurance
yeah,
company is gonna let their rock star or their Tim Cook, you know, fly into a potentially infested area and
hmm
spend a weekend in a room with 5,000 people. Like,
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
every insurance company on the planet says, "Are you nuts? You can't even afford the premiums we'd have to charge you for that."
Yeah, and to that, you know, you got to think of any Fortune 100 to 1,000 company. It's got you know, as much insurance lawyers as they possibly can, who are going to say, you know, I don't care what any health industry says, we're not going to insure you if you fly to San Francisco.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so you know, as I said, those kind of hybrid events are going to be the way of the future for the next long while.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's pretty much the truth of the situation. And I mean, the fact is we all know the entertainment sector is the last one going to come back. Like it'll be next year before we actually get to see a concert or a festival size event happening, if that early, right? So
Yeah, but that being said, there's some really great innovation that's happening in that space right now. Like, you know, with some early, as I said, very early adopters when Fortnite did that concert
yeah.
as a live event over their platform, it was really well received. You know, nobody's really done that since
Well,
because I
there's
think,
been another couple that I've read about on Animal Crossing. They've held
mhm,
some events on that platform as well. So I
Hmm.
mean, the techno savvy kids are kind of leading the charge on hijacking existing technologies to meet up essentially. So,
Hmm.
and that brings me to my next questions. Do you think like we're moving towards a world where VR for events will be something we'll have to look at in the near future? Because I have a hunch it'll be going that way just to increase the immersion level that the
Hmm.
communicators are always looking for, because you always want to be as immersive as possible for your audience, right? And
Hmm.
so for me, it just seems like a logical step, especially if you look at how VR technology is currently developing and exploding into the mainstream, that it's reached that level of maturity where it can actually be used by the average consumer without having to be a gearhead, right?
Yeah.
So I'm expecting like in the course of this year or latest next year, VR to break into the mainstream widespread market, especially with devices like the PS5 and stuff coming out, and
Hmm.
many other companies to focusing on that technology. I think that'll also be something that we'll have to look into as a target media platform for the
Hmm.
audience, which will bring its own new challenges as far as the production side. Because obviously, if you're going to be in a full stereoscopic, immersive head tracking environment, you have to create your production environment differently. You can't just have a stage where you're controlling the cameras, because these people are interactively changing the perspective and all that, right?
Yeah, I mean, so to address the first point there, I hear a mixed bag, and I'm certainly not an expert on VR or XR, which is covers VR and augmented reality. Um, there are certainly some people out there who can speak better to it. What I have experienced so far is, um, you know, either there's like one sentiment that is like the technology is not 100% there yet, so we don't necessarily want to go down that road. The expense obviously is a huge, because it's a great experience, but when you start thinking about like Animal Crossing or Fortnite, Bungie just did a their first live event, which was in game as well. There's a couple of companies that I work with now that are building sort of VR or game-based programs to be able to present entertainment that way. I saw a demo the other day, and it was quite amazing. Um, but the the end user experience is going to be one of the biggest barriers there, because so um, like if you're talking about a VR thing, right? So you need a VR headset and maybe some haptic gloves if you're really into that. But even if not, you still have those little triggers that you gotta use to move around the space, other than sort of walking through your house. So the logistics of like, we're gonna send 1,000 attendees a VR headset, like just the expense starts to go skyrocketing.
Yeah, no,
Uh,
obviously we're not
yeah,
there yet, but like I was saying, I'm predicting the technology, because we're just at that threshold to cross that line where the end user experience has become consumer friendly enough for it to break into the mass market in the next 2 years. Like
hmm
like you said, we're not there yet, because you're absolutely right. It's the end user experience is not good enough yet in most cases. But like I've been just recently following a lot of the prototypes, and there's actually a collaborative alliance between all of the VR manufacturing companies. They've come together and
hmm
created something called, I believe, something like the Open XR Alliance or something like that, where
hmm
they're basically agreeing on common standards for all XR type platforms, which is propelling the development forward hugely. And a whole bunch of new products are expected by the end of this year. So
hmm
I think basically market saturation will be something in VR to look at in the course of 2021. And
hmm
I expect actually that by probably 2022, it'll be a viable end user media option for certain cases. Probably not to ship 1,000 headsets to people, probably
hmm
not, but something where you can provide your top 200 sales reps around the planet with a
hmm
$300 headset each.
Right.
That allows them to have a telepresence at the next sales conference, an
Sure.
interactive presence where they feel like they're there and they can raise their hand and voice questions and whatever, you know. I think
Hmm.
we'll reach that level within the next 2 years, just given
Yeah,
where we're
absolutely.
at right now, and how much force is being pushed into that sector of innovation right now due to the circumstances, right?
Hmm.
Everybody's focusing on that because all of their other avenues of focus are obviously like put on ice for now because there's no
Hmm.
point, right?
Yeah, I think there's still going to be a market immediately for augmented reality because those
Oh
are
yeah, for
because
sure.
of all the because every iPhone or Android device on the planet at this point has that capability. Then the barrier to entry is much lower.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, on the back end though, there's still there is sort of a larger expense to be able, like, because it's not as like, I know you see some videos every once in a while of like a guy picks up his phone and goes like boop, and there's my thing on my phone. It's really not that easy. There's a
No.
lot of back end, and there's a lot of people, like a lot of the client base are sort of seeing those videos and going like, oh my god, it's really that easy, and then they get the price tag for it and they go, how is that easy, that expensive? And
That's
it's
why
it
it's so expensive to make it that
yeah,
easy.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, I don't dabble in AR and VR because I'm really not an expert in it. If a client comes to me and wants to do it, then I bring in a partner to do that. But I could see it like, if you can eliminate barriers to entry, and because here's the thing about virtual production right now is that the barrier to entry for a viewer to come and watch it is having a computer, and everybody has a computer, and they have a web browser, so it's fine. If we start talking about like the Fortnite, uh, all of those kind of like game-like experiences, I mean, all of those rendering engines, all of those interaction platforms are based on gaming engines, and to do that, you need to have a console.
Well,
There's
you
certain
need to have
products
a certain level of performance in your computer. Let's say this way.
yeah, absolutely. Like like even if you have a Steam connection, or like even Google Stadia tried it, they did not do well. But there's a couple
NVIDIA
of
did a
other.
lot better with their NVIDIA now, actually. That
Yeah,
works a
they
lot
they
better
actually
than
did.
Stadia.
Yeah, I've actually played Destiny 2 on
Me
Nvidia, and
too,
it's
fun
like, yeah,
ironically.
yeah,
The only irk I have with NVIDIA now is that I can't get external joysticks or controllers to work.
yeah.
So
Well,
far, I've only get it with keyboard and mouse, but again,
yeah,
that's
for sure. And so but again, think of like, you and I are nerds, right? So if if somebody were to say you could attend this conference and all you need is an Xbox, no problem. I've got one right there. But then if I were to look into my neighborhood, which is sort of middle class, executive, professional kind of level, not everybody has an Xbox. Not everybody has a console. Maybe they have one in their house, but it's like their kids, right?
yeah.
And so, and then try to get the CEO of Rogers Media to put on a headset and walk around with an Xbox controller. Those are and it's almost a perceived barrier to entry there,
Right.
right? But if you were to turn to that same executive and say, so here's a camera and here's a mic, and you plug it in there, and then all of a sudden you're part of this conference and you can see those people on screen,
Yeah.
there's there's very little barrier to entry
Yeah,
there.
no, that makes sense because that's stuff they're familiar with, right? They're familiar with talking into a camera and a microphone, so that's obviously not going to put them outside of their comfort zone. Which, yeah,
Hmm.
you're absolutely right. In my experience, that's the biggest thing with presenters of any form is to keep them
Hmm.
in their comfort zone because they're quite often so sensitive and nervous creatures because they got so much on their mind that they're trying to pack into their presentations, or they're just like they do this once a year, so they're totally psyched up and nervous to go out on
Hmm.
that stage. So to keep them in their comfort zone is probably one of the most important things any of us can do on a corporate site, right?
Yeah, and I'm going to do a shameless plug here and say that's precisely how we design Studio in a Box, right? Like the main part of that execution was getting those familiar things back into the workflow. we were seeing so many people, and the end result of it, and the back end production of it was a little bit hairy because okay, you could ship them a webcam and a ring light or a laptop, and then you spend a lot of time on like go through Windows and find your mic. Okay, can enable that one, disable this one?
Yeah. Can you
And then they
elaborate
were
a little more what your studio in a box is for those who don't follow your LinkedIn page as
sure,
closely as
yeah.
I do?
So Studio in a Box is a headless modular video upload and communication system. That's essentially what it is. And it came from two challenges that we started to look at. One being, I would look at things that were being produced over Zoom conferences for the first couple of weeks after virtual events started being a thing, and they were terrible. And because Zoom is a good platform, but it's not really meant for broadcasting
Yeah,
quality
no,
video.
exactly. It's great for panel discussions and roundtable stuff in like groups of maybe up to 10 people. But after
Sure.
that, it just gets like, and it's not a point to multi-point kind of thing at all.
No, and I always put it in the context of like all these virtual event platforms and everything, and even Zoom itself are venues. They are digital venues, and Zoom is the equivalent of a conference room. And so you wouldn't put 1,000-person event in your conference room. It
Exactly.
just
It's
doesn't
great for
make
breakouts, but not for general session.
exactly. And
Yeah.
so we started to think about, so how do we create something that allows the CEO or the marketing director or keynote speaker to broadcast into a platform, with better quality video and lighting and audio, and then how do we also do the things that as a stage manager I must have, like communication with all of my production team, communication with the speaker. How do I give them downstage monitors? How do I give them prompting? How do I do all of those things? And so and then we thought, well, you could do that by sending all the gear to their house, right? I could send like a little mini setup to their house,
Like they did with
with a camera.
Colbert after a week of watching him on Zoom.
Well, for Zach,
Yeah.
exactly, right? And so we could do all of that, but then, so who's going to run the camera? Who's going to balance the audio? Is that like the CEO's life partner? Is that their son? Is that me on a phone call with the CEO saying, okay, so there's a dial on the side of the camera that says white balance, and can you turn it,
Oh my
right? And
God. Don't
then
remind
trying,
me how many times I've had to do stuff like that.
well, exactly. And
Yeah.
so essentially we created, it's a processing unit that ingests essentially a PTZ camera. And from that encodes and does all the things, and then sends it over to the NDI network to a master control where we can then overlay graphics and do live mixing.
Right.
Then on the flip side of that, there's
So you're
another
basically you're
device.
streaming the signal to your front of house location wherever that may be, and then you're processing it there and then distributing it from there.
Pretty much, yeah. That's an
Okay.
oversimplification, but for sure.
Yeah.
The flip side of it is that because it's NDI technology, we can then stream back to the box. And so through that, we can send multi-view, downstage monitors, prompter view, and audio monitoring signal and a comm signal throughout all of the infrastructure. And the comm
Nice.
signal is on a slightly separate system, so that you don't need a studio in a box in every location, but different. Like you could mount that on your laptop and be part of that comm signal
Okay.
while the box is transmitting comm. And what that gave me as a producer was the ability to say, if you're one of the presenters, I could go into comm with you and get an in-ear monitor and say, oh, hey, Chris, we're coming to you in 5 minutes. Like, could
Right.
you adjust your tie? Move yourself to the left here.
Yeah.
And so have the same kind of thing that we would have had on site. And again, give that speaker that ability to have the same tools that they've always had. As you mentioned earlier, they do this once a year. They're a little nervous. All of these, like we do this every day, so it's
Yeah.
old hand. But for that speaker, They want to feel supported. They want to feel that somebody's there to help them through this, that they have all the resources there available to them.
Mm.
And this was the solution that we came up with to be able to give all of those tools to them. It's one thing that I'll say that not everybody has gotten. I had one client inquiry a little while ago where they were very interested in Studio in the Box. They wanted, and what they were perceiving in their mind is a laptop and a ring light. And I said, well, we don't do that. We do this. And I started giving them the price point, and they were a little because there is a definite price point between these two solutions.
Yeah, of course.
And but then when I started to explain, like, no, but you can communicate them in real time, they started telling me the nightmare story of like, well, the last time we did this, we had a DJ in his house and a camera and some lights, and then we were like texting him to let him know that we were starting. And we were on the so the DJ was like, yeah, I'm ready, like that. And so we have eliminated that completely, because I could not. It makes my skin crawl to think about doing an event like
that. Yeah, I know what you mean. It's like, but that's when you have people who have been sold basically an inferior solution by some snake oil salesman, essentially, who's, like you said, probably some DJ, who's got a video camcorder and maybe, a laptop that can stream, and says, oh yeah, I can do that part of the business too. And it's just good enough a salesman to talk the client into saying, yeah, I can do this. And then the client is basically burned by that experience, for all future approaches to something similar, because oh no, that doesn't work, we've tried it in the past, it went horrible, and we don't want to do this kind of thing again. So how do you overcome that, that kind of like a pre-damaged client, basically? How do you overcome that?
I mean, it's really just about client education, right? It's about understanding that that they may have had a poor experience in the past, and then showing them the difference. And to be bluntly honest, if a client has a bad experience like that, and they're not ever going to go down that road, I appreciate that. Good luck to you, and have a good life. To be the business development owner hat comes on when I say, well, look, I'm going to move on and find the right client, right? And the flip side of that is, I think that eventually that traumatized client will come back into the fray and say, oh, I get it. Like, now I've seen how that works for somebody else.
Right. Yeah, I've seen my competition do it often enough, so clearly it has to be possible. So now I want to get back in on that kind of thing. Right?
Well, exactly. So it's a bit of a longer game, but the truth is that I'm sorry that a client would have had that kind of a bad experience, but in the end, I hope to make it better for them if they give us a shot at it. But if they're really gun shy like that, then there's no point in trying to convince them no.
No, you're absolutely right. And like in my experience, it's also like a really bad idea if you try to sell them like a solution that fits their expectations or budget, which is subpar. And because you're not going to end up doing them a favor or yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
By selling a subpar solution, you're just going to enforce their stereotypes or preconceptions of how bad it's going to be. And at the same time, you make it really hard on yourself to actually sell them quality solutions.
Yes, absolutely.
So I mean, that's always thing. But in the long run, you're probably right. It's probably better to say, you know what, this is probably not the right project for us to work on together. Because we obviously have different expectations of where budget and quality meet on this. So. But if you change your mind, feel free to come back or whatever. We can have another conversation about this in the future. Or if your budget for some reason explodes suddenly, and you find yourself in a position where you expect more quality, then sure, let's sit down and revisit this, right?
Absolutely.
But now the thing is, we talked a lot about what companies can do and what it means for technology. The other side of the thing is, the amount of staff that's going to be required for these types of events is obviously going to be significantly lower than for a full-scale live event, because you're
Mhm.
missing the whole audience side of the event, right? So all the labor required with anything related to the audience, from, let's say, barricades, from running multi-cores to flying a PA system, basically, right?
Mhm.
All of those things will basically are eliminated from the virtual events, more or less, to some extent, right? You don't need a big PA, you don't need friggin' huge line arrays to do a virtual show. Some monitor speakers will do fine, and maybe some sticks for the 10 people in the fake audience, kind of thing, right?
Mhm.
But what does that mean, for, let's say, your average stagehand who's not a technician, who's not in that scope, where they're going to teach themselves video servers, or they're going to teach themselves IP networking protocols to be able to stay relevant in the changing technologies. What do you think their role will be going forward in this new world? Let's call it. What do you think? Do you
Yeah.
think they have any options?
I think they are going to have to do some adaptation because you know the reality is that for certainly for the short term and for the medium term, that there's going to be a lot of people in our industry that are greatly affected by that.
Mm,
They and I hope they have the opportunity to go out and learn new skills and I, I can certainly say that part of the first couple of weeks of this pandemic, I spent training on things that I thought I knew or that I knew, but like out of practice. But then I went and got all my certifications and all those kind of things. That's certainly a first step because I know that in the long term, those things will come back in one form or another. It may
mm,
be reduced or changed a little bit, but that like if I'm an audio engineer and I haven't learned the Meyer system yet, but I've been practicing on Meyer for years. Now's the time to go out and really get a solid Meyer certification,
right.
right?
Yeah,
So
I
that
know the sound web now. Somebody needs to teach me the Galileo or whatever, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
For day labor and freelance labor right now, like it's going to be very hard. And I can't speak to anybody's choices, but what I would say is, if you're counting on that coming back in the fall, then you may be putting yourself in danger there. That being said, there is ample opportunity to go out and learn new skills and
Mm,
adapt to those things. Um, Unfortunately, the reality is, for your average guy who's humping truss and stage, for the foreseeable future, I would go look at a different career right now, which is unfortunate because there are some really amazing people who work in this
yeah.
industry that I haven't seen for 6 months now, and I'd love to see them again.
Yeah.
Um, but that is the striking reality. What I think what's going to be interesting on the flip side of this is that when things start to reopen, where you used to have like one really good audio guy and like 20 good ones, and then a whole ocean of okay guys, you're now going to have, like, if people take advantage of this and do that training and augmentation of skills, you're now going to have a higher degree of like those super awesome audio guys, right? And so those top guys are really going to have to differentiate themselves from the pack, as it were. Um, uh, there are, I would say that there would be some advantage if like if you kind of like this industry, and you were in it because this is what your job was, then you maybe need to start looking elsewhere, because certainly for the short term, uh, those jobs have disappeared.
Right. I agree. Like I
Um,
was talking to a couple of stage hands recently, and I'm planning to do some interviews with some of the labor providers here in Toronto. Some of the Invisible Skies and Labor Pluses of the world,
Yeah.
and see what their take on this subject is. But I've also recently spoke with a buddy of mine whose mom hired a whole bunch of stagehands as farmhands to load hay for him.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
And I'm hoping to get like his mom to record a little testimonial for us how that went, because apparently she was like severely impressed at like what these guys pulled off. She had like, I don't know, 600 barrels of hay to load on a truck, which would, she expected to take like 2 days. And my
Yeah.
buddy said, what, 600 barrels? I'll give you 5 stagehands. They'll do it in a 4-hour call. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Because
That's,
that's what they do. They put stuff on trucks all day long. You
yeah,
don't
yeah,
find
yeah.
anybody better at that.
Yeah, so it's interesting that, my wife and I were actually having this discussion the other day. I will say that we are very fortunate. Like, I run my own business. My wife is a teacher. We're certainly in different boats. But, we were sitting there thinking, if we didn't have that, what would we do? And, the country as a whole is going to start running into a crisis at some point near the fall, because of travel restrictions, because of immigration restrictions that are put in place at the moment. Temporary foreign workers are just may not be a thing. And so, you know, I think we all have to look at our lives and get over our little privileges and say, look, like, maybe that cool job where you get to wear a nice shirt isn't there right now, but as part of your contribution as a member of our society, your skills can be recontextualized into baling hay or going to pick crops. um, you know I would not be opposed to myself going out. Like, my wife likes to make fun of me and say I get a sunburn and quit in the day. But we have to really look at that. And the reality is that the work ethic within our industry, like, it's one of the things that is like a double-edged sword. That we have complained in the past, and we will in the future, about like the 10-15 hour days and the fact that the show must go on. And that double-edged sword of, yeah, it's a great aspect of our work ethic, but then can also be taken advantage of. And we certainly have to keep an eye out for that. But the idea that, as you said, like, I'll get you 5 stagehands and we'll do that in a 4-hour call because that's what we're used to, right? With the parameters of let's be safe and,
of course,
work effectively.
That's the thing.
But like that work, I could imagine that you could potentially change the economy, really, if you said to every farmer in Southern Ontario that you want a workforce that will go and efficiently load all your hay bales in an afternoon, or over the next couple of weeks. We'll do it, and we'll do it well. And again, I don't want to take away from any temporary foreign worker, because they are an essential part of our economy as well. And certainly, I don't think that if you were a stagehand, you should now become a farmhand for the rest of.
But it's an
career.
option you have for the time being, right? I mean,
yeah, and the reality is that we all have to shift in how we do things for the near future, so that we can get back to the long term future.
Right.
Chris, unfortunately, it's just past 3 p.m. and I have to get going.
Okay, well, I really, really appreciate this. And you know what? I really would like to come get back together again and revisit your alliance thing, because that is a really interesting subject, and I'm sure a lot of people would love to get on board with that and participate in that. So we'll find another day and we can talk about that specifically in a little more detail.
Sure.
And, yeah. And thank you very much. It's been great fun. I hope we get to work together soon.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it's always fun working with you. It always has been. And say hello to your family for me. I don't know who it was who was secretly, quietly opening the cupboard behind you earlier, trying to get something out and out.
Yeah, that was my wife. Yeah.
But tell her she was very stealthy at that. Very well
Yeah,
executed.
thank you. Okay, good. I will. All
Okay,
right,
Matt,
sir.
I appreciate it. You guys have a wonderful rest of your day, and
All
thanks
right.
again. Take care.
We'll talk soon, buddy.
Bye.